Welcome back to Play the Game HQ. I'm Daniel, and in this video, we're going to teach you how to play We're Sinking, a Pirate's Dilemma from Ludamus Games, who helped sponsor this video. We're Sinking is a semi-cooperative pirate game where you'll be working together to fight the enemy and slow the sinking of your ship. But you're also pirates, so there will probably be some deception and backstabbing along the way because at the end of the day, the lifeboat only has enough room for one person, so despite your best efforts at teamwork, there will only be one winner. But how that winner is determined depends on whether or not you delay the sinking of your ship long enough to defeat the enemy. Each round you'll be dealing with water coming onto the ship, attacks from the enemy, repairing the damage done by those attacks, and potentially having your ship sink a little bit more. And once all that is done, everyone will discuss the best course of action to address the sinking ship and the looming enemy for that round. Once you have a plan, whether you follow that plan or choose to lie to the other players for your own benefit is up to you, because you are a pirate and sometimes treasure is more important than honesty. The game can end in two ways. If you are able to work together and defeat the enemy, then the player with the most points wins the game and takes the lifeboat. But if the ship sinks, then the player with the fewest cards in their hand wins because they have the least amount of stuff weighing them down as they cling to the debris of their former ship waiting to be rescued. To set up the game, lay out the main board in the middle of the table with plenty of space below it for the columns of cards and the action dials you'll be putting there during the game. There's 4 specific columns you'll be building under the board: water, treasure, breaches, and cannons. The ship is divided into multiple layers, which is what lets it slowly sink during the game. Assemble the sails and put them in the top layer of the ship, then shuffle the chest tokens and put 2 face down into each of the 3 lower hull sections. Then put the rest of the chest tokens back in the box without looking at them. Stack the ship sections to fully assemble the ship, and then put the assembled ship on the open space at the top of the game board. In an actual game, the ship will stay here the entire time, but for this video, I'm going to set it off to the side at times to give you a clearer view of the board. Choose the threshold sheet that matches your player count. We're setting up for a 4-player game here, so we have the 4-player sheet, but there's sheets for 3 to 6 players in the game. Tuck half of the sheet under the board so that the level 1 cargo hold is visible. As the ship sinks, this will be flipped and rotated to reflect the increasing severity of your ship's problems. The last player to go swimming becomes the first mate and gets the first mate scroll with the duties checklist side face up. The first mate will guide you through each phase of the game each round, but more importantly, this determines the order for placing your action dials during the game, and the first mate scroll will move clockwise through the players each round. There's a few different enemies in the game that you can face, but thankfully you only have to fight 1 per game. Choose an enemy from the available sheets and put the rest back in the box, then check the setup section of your chosen enemy for special setup rules. For your first game, it's recommended that you fight the Kraken. To set up the Kraken, find the hurdy-gurdy and the war drum cards and set those aside to shuffle into the water deck later during setup. Each enemy has their own cards with their enemy icon in the bottom corner. You can put the rest of the enemy cards back in the box as you'll only use the cards for the active enemy in this game. The Kraken setup tells us to start with 4 active enemy dice. Each enemy has 2 of their own special attack dice, so we'll take those 2 dice plus 2 basic attack dice and set those on the enemy sheet, and this is what the Kraken will roll during the threat phase. And that's all of the setup for the Kraken. To set up the players, give everyone a player aid and a character sheet with the matching color action dial, and put any leftover character sheets and action dials back in the box. Each player has a specific character item that they'll start the game with. The character item cards have a colored strip at the top of the card and an icon that matches the player sheet. Give each player their starting player card plus 3 clear water cards, but don't put the unused starting item cards back in the box. Those will get shuffled into the main deck. There's a few different types of cards in the game. You have treasure cards, water cards, breach cards, and cannon cards, but you'll eventually assemble them into decks based on the symbol on the back of the card. Except for the cannon card, those are double-sided, so they don't have a symbol on the back. Shuffle together all of the gem cards, the basic item cards, and any unused character cards, as well as any enemy cards. So for the Kraken, that's the 2 cards we set aside earlier. Then from this deck, deal 2 treasure cards face up into the treasure column. Take the deck of clear water cards and remove 15, 10, or 5 for 3, 4, or 5 players, and for 6 players, you won't remove any. Shuffle the remaining clear water cards together with the treasure deck that you just made, and this is your water deck. Put the water deck face down onto its matching space on the board and deal 1 card face down from the water deck into the water column. Next, take the breach deck, which has this symbol on the back, and check the bottom center of each card and remove any cards that don't match your player count. If a card doesn't show a player count, then it's used in every game. Deal 1 minor breach face up into the breaches column, then shuffle the rest of the breach cards to make the breach deck and put it on its spot on the board. Put the permanent breach tokens to the right of the breach deck, then assemble your cannons. There's 3 different types of cannons in the game: single, double, and triple shot. The cannon cards are double-sided with a normal side and a busted side, and busted cannons will have to be repaired before they can be used. There's also cannon dice to match the type of cannon based on the marks in the corner, so a single, double, and triple shot dice. The type of dice reflects how many sides have a hit symbol, so you're much more likely to get a hit with a triple shot than a single shot. Put 1 single shot card and dice with the normal side face up into the cannons column. Then put 1 busted double shot and 1 busted single shot card in the breaches column with their dice, and put the rest of the cannon cards in a stack near the board. As you play, you'll be collecting cards into your hand. This could be treasure, it could be useful items, and it could just be water cards weighing you down. And I say could be because that information is private. You're a pirate, and the contents of your hand of cards is your business and your business alone, unless of course you choose to share it. And you can be as honest or misleading about what's in your hand as you want, but the size of your hand is public knowledge, so you have to be honest about it if anybody asks how many cards you have. But beyond that, you share as much or as little about your hand of cards as you want. There's a few different types of cards you'll come across during the game. Treasure cards have a chest in the top left corner, and treasure cards will be either gems or items. Gems are worth points at the end of the game, and they show their value on the card as well as how many of that gem are in the deck. So this amethyst is worth 2 points, and there's 9 amethysts in the deck. And the rarer the gem, the more it's worth. Item cards are another type of treasure card that can be used at certain points during the game, and some of those are worth points at the end of the game. And these include your character cards and the enemy cards you shuffled into the deck during setup. Each item card has a condition that tells you when it can be played. Enemy dice rolled means you play it after the enemy dice are rolled, but before they're resolved. Declare cards are played after you declare an action with your action dial, reveal cards are played after you reveal your action dial, and resolve cards are played after you resolve your action. So with the water pistol, after I resolve a bucket action, I can give 1 clear water card in my hand to another player. You can play multiple cards each round, but you can only play 1 card per round for each type of trigger. So I can play a card that triggers when I declare my action and then another card when I resolve my action, but I couldn't play 2 cards when I resolve my action. And clear water cards are worthless cards that just weigh you down. You start with 3 of these and you'll probably get more during the game, but in most cases you want to get rid of those whenever you can. Anytime you discard a treasure or clear water card, it goes face down in the discard pile in the middle of the board. And anytime you discard a breach card, it goes face down on the bottom of the breach deck. And now you know everything you need to know to get started playing. Where sinking is played over rounds until you either defeat the enemy or the ship sinks. Each round follows a specific set of steps, and the first mate will use the duties checklist to walk you through each step of the round. You'll start the round by adding water to your ship and potentially sinking farther into the water. Then the enemy will attack, and after that you'll work together to address both the sinking ship and the enemy you're fighting, and then you'll repeat that process in each new round until the game ends. The first step in each round is the inspect phase, where you'll check the ship for leaks. Check the breach column, and for each water icon shown on a breach card or a permanent breach token, add 1 water card face down to the water column. So to start, we just have this 1 little leak, so we'll add 1 card to the water column. But if we add a larger breach, like this major breach, we would add 3 cards to the water column, and if we had a permanent breach token in this column, we would add 4 cards. Once you've added all of the water cards from breaches, you'll check to see if the ship is about to sink down another level. On the threshold sheet, check the current water threshold, which is currently at 6. If the number of cards in the water column is less than the water threshold, you'll go on to the threat phase. But if the number of cards is equal to or higher than the water threshold, flip over the first mate scroll and go through the sinking procedures. So let's say instead of 2 cards, we had 7 cards here with a threshold of 6. That means the ship is going to sink down 1 layer. When your ship sinks, first remove the lowest layer of the ship and take out the 2 chest tokens without looking at them and put both of those at the bottom of the breaches column. Then advance the threshold card to the next level. We're on level 1 right now, so we'll rotate it to level 2 and tuck it back under the board. Level 3 and 4 are on the back if you need to advance it again. Shuffle all of the cards in the water deck, the discard pile, and the water and treasure columns to create a new water deck. And finally, if there's any breach cards in the breaches column, discard those to the bottom of the deck and add a permanent breach token. But you only add that if you add breach cards in this column when you're resolving the sinking. Once you're finished sinking, flip the first mate scroll back over and continue on to the threat phase. During the threat phase, you'll add new water and treasure cards, then you'll roll and resolve the enemy dice. And it's important to note you are allowed to go over the water threshold during these later phases of the round. The only time you can sink from being over that threshold is during the inspection phase. So if you do go over in a later phase, you need to do your best to get back below that threshold before the next round begins. First, check the current threshold sheet and see how many water and treasure cards to add. Because we just sank, we're on level 2, so we're going to add 2 water cards and 3 treasure cards. The water cards go face down in the water column, and the treasure cards go face up in the treasure column. When you're dealing out treasure cards, if you ever deal a clear water card, leave it face up and move it to the water column, then deal out another treasure card, and keep dealing until you've added the number of cards shown on the threshold sheet to the treasure column. So here we had to deal out 5 cards because within those there were 2 clear water cards, and we needed to add a total of 3 cards to the treasure column. The treasure column can only hold 5 cards, so if you ever have more than 5 cards in that column, discard the oldest card in the row, that's going to be the top card, to get back down to 5 cards. Next, the enemy attacks, and in this case, that's the Kraken. Each enemy has their own special attack dice that they roll, and as they take damage during the game, that will be tracked on this track at the bottom of their card, and they will gain additional basic attack dice as they take damage. So the Kraken starts with 2 basic attack dice that we gave them during setup, and then when they get to this space and this space, each of those will give them an additional basic attack dice to roll on the attack phase. Some enemies will lose dice as they take damage, and that's shown by a minus dice symbol instead of a plus dice symbol. So first you'll roll all of the dice in the enemy's dice pool and then resolve them one by one, starting with their special dice. And their enemy sheet tells you how to resolve their dice abilities. If you roll the Kraken's Splash ability, take the top card in the treasure column and put it face down into the water column. And if you roll an angered symbol, anytime a card is added to the discard pile this round, you'll roll and resolve 1 basic attack dice. If you do roll that angered symbol, put 1 of the extra black attack dice onto the discard pile as a reminder. And the basic attack dice all have the exact same faces. If you roll the water symbol, deal a card from the water deck face down into the water column. If you roll a leak symbol, add a face-up breach card to the breach column. And if you roll a cannon, flip the top card in the cannon column to its busted side and move it to the breaches column where it's out of commission until it gets repaired. So if this was our enemy roll, we have 1 splash symbol. That's going to move this sapphire face down into the water column. We have 2 water symbols. That's going to add 2 more cards from the water deck to the water column. And then we're going to add the top card from the breach deck to the breaches column. Once you resolve all of the enemy's dice, it's on to the task phase. This is where the real work and most of the lying and backstabbing happens. During the task phase, you're going to talk about what needs to be done and how you as a team will go about doing those things. These are things like removing water so you don't sink the next round, patching holes and repairing cannons and attacking the enemy. But you may also want to steal away some treasure for yourself. Each person has 1 action that they'll contribute, and you'll choose that action using your action dial. During this time of discussion, you need to talk about what needs to be done. In this case, we need to address the water problem. We are at our threshold and we have leaks in the boat, and we should probably try to attack the Kraken at least once. During this time, you're free to ask questions, make plans, decide exactly what each person is going to do, and you don't have to stick to any of that. You're allowed to lie, be deceptive, or even change your mind at the last minute because you're pirates. The only thing you have to be honest about is how many cards are in your hand. Once this discussion is over and you have a plan, it's time to pick and declare your actions. Starting with the first mate and going clockwise around the table, each player will secretly choose an action on their action dial. There's 4 actions you can choose. You can bucket water, plunder treasure, patch breaches, or fire cannons. And those correspond to the 4 columns on the board. Once you've selected your action, place your dial face down into one of the 4 columns, but that column doesn't have to match what your dial actually says. You're free to lie during this step. So during the planning phase, I said I would address the leaks in the boat, so I'm going to place my dial in the breaches column. But my dial is set to plunder, so I'm not actually going to fix the ship this round. I'm going to take treasure. The only restriction here is that you can't put your dial in an empty column or in a breach column if it only has permanent breach tokens. Once everyone has placed their dials, it's time to reveal who was being honest and who was lying. At the same time, each player reveals their action dial, then going left to right, starting with the water column, check to see if any players lied. If there's more than 1 dial in a column, check the top one first. If someone lied and their dial doesn't match the column they're in, move that action dial to the bottom of the correct column. And the order here is important because players are going to resolve their action dials from top to bottom. So in the treasure column, for instance, going first has an advantage, but in the water column, the last player to go has an advantage. So I lied about going to the breach column, and I'll move my dial over to the treasure column. Once everyone's dials are in the right place, each player resolves their action separately, going from left to right, top to bottom. So as it currently stands, gray is going to bucket water, red is going to plunder treasure, yellow is going to patch the boat, and green is going to fire cannons. And I will be moving these dials around as we go through examples of each action, but in an actual game, once they're revealed and moved to their matching column, they're locked in and won't be moved. If you played a bucket, take any one card from the water column and add it to your hand, then discard one card from your hand into the discard pile. This is the main way that you'll get clear water cards out of your hand, by drawing cards that are hopefully useful and then discarding the worthless cards, because these cards are a mixture of water and treasure, so there is some good stuff floating around in the water that's pouring out of your ship. So in this example, I was able to get a ruby and then discard a clear water card. If you're the last or only player to take a bucket action on a turn, you'll draw 2 cards from the water column and then discard 2 cards from your hand to the discard pile. If you choose a plunder action, you get to take cards from the treasure column. If only one person chooses to plunder, they get to take all of the cards into their hand. But if more than one person plunders, take turn drawing cards and take an equal number of cards. The player with the top dial goes first, so red would draw first and then gray. And because there's 3 cards, they would each take 1 card, so they take an equal number of cards, and then that 3rd card will get left over for the next round. If more players plunder than there are cards, then all of the treasure cards get discarded and no one gets any treasure. Playing a hammer lets you take the patch action, and this is how you're going to repair your ship. And there's 3 options you can choose from with the patch action. You can patch a breach, you can repair a cannon, or you can bust open a treasure chest if there's one there. Some of these can be done by one person and some will require teamwork. First, either draw a card from the water deck or discard a card from your hand, then choose one of the 3 actions to take. To patch a breach, match the number of hammers on one of the breach cards, then discard that card face down to the bottom of the breaches deck. Some breaches need multiple hammers to be repaired, so players will have to work together for these, and hammers aren't saved from round to round, so to repair this major breach, 2 players need to choose their hammer action on the same turn and agree to repair that breach card together. So the yellow player and the red player both chose to play our hammer this turn. If yellow wants to repair that major breach, I would have to use my hammer along with them, which means that I won't get to take a separate turn later. So if I was planning on fixing a cannon or taking one of the treasure chests, I would be giving up my option to do that by committing to use my hammer with yellow to repair that major breach. So we'll say that I want to save my red hammer to do something else, so yellow is going to repair this minor breach, and that gets discarded to the bottom of the breaches pile. To repair a cannon, choose any busted cannon in the breaches column, flip it back over to its normal side, and then put it in the cannons column along with its dice. And strategically, this was probably the right decision because we know that green is taking a cannon action this turn, so they now get to fire 2 cannons instead of the 1 they would have gotten to fire if I hadn't repaired that on my turn. If you're feeling piratey, then instead of repairing the ship, you can use your hammer to bust open a treasure chest. When you do that, take the treasure token and keep it in front of you to use later, and it's your choice whether or not you tell the other players what that chest token says. If a chest token has an ability, you can play that at any time unless the ability says otherwise. For example, this one lets me re-roll 2 blank cannon dice, so obviously I would only use that when I take a cannon action. And page 19 of the rulebook explains all of the chest actions. The last action you can do is the fire action. If you choose this, roll all the dice in the cannon column. So this roll causes 2 damage and will move the damage tracker 2 spaces to the right. And because we moved on this space with the plus dice symbol, we give the Kraken 1 more basic attack dice to roll the next round. There's 3 types of cannons in the game: single, double, and triple shot, and that refers to the number of hit icons on the dice, so the better the cannon, the more likely you are to roll a hit. But regardless of the type of cannon, each hit rolled only causes 1 damage. Cannons also have an ability that lets you reveal and discard 1 treasure card to re-roll a blank dice, and you can do this once per round for each cannon, as long as you have the treasure cards to discard. Some items and chest tokens let you upgrade your cannons, and they'll always upgrade 1 step at a time, so a single will always upgrade to a double, and a double always upgrades to a triple. Once everyone has resolved their action, move on to the upkeep phase. If you have fewer than 2 cards in your hand at the end of the round, draw from the water deck until you have 2 cards in your hand. And if you have more than 10 cards in your hand, randomly discard down to 10, then pass the first mate scroll 1 player to the left, and you're ready to start the next round. The game can end in 2 ways. Either you defeat the enemy or your ship sinks. The enemy is defeated when the damage tracker moves onto the farthest right spot of the damage track. When this happens, the game ends immediately without resolving any more actions or playing any more cards. If anyone has less than 2 cards, they'll draw up to 2, and if anyone has more than 10 cards, they need to randomly discard down to 10, then everyone reveals their hands. Add up the points on all of your cards and any chest tokens you collected, and the player with the most total points wins. And if there's a tie, the tied player with the fewest cards wins, and if there's still a tie, players just share the victory. But that's only if you defeated the enemy. The game also ends if you ever sink the 4th and final layer of your ship. Just like defeating the enemy, when this happens, you can't take any more actions or play any more cards, but unlike defeating the enemy, when the ship sinks, all of the treasure you've been stealing is now weighing you down. The value of the cards themselves doesn't matter, everyone just needs to count the total number of cards they have, and the player with the fewest cards in their hand wins. So if you feel like the ship is about to sink, you may want to start playing some of those action cards you've been holding on to. If there's a tie, then add up the point value of all of your cards and chess tokens, and the tied player with the highest score wins, and if there's still a tie, you'll just have to share the victory. And that's We're Sinking. If you have any questions at all, be sure to leave us a comment below and we'll answer as quick as we can. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you later. Bye.